The words didn't echo the way they should have, not in a house with ceilings that high. "Get out and don't come back!" My mother's voice cut straight through the room, sharp and rehearsed, like she'd been practicing it in her head long before she said it out loud. The chandelier above us was still, no dramatic shaking. There it was, a recurring transaction labeled family support. Amount, $3,850. Frequency, monthly. Next payment, in 4 days. I stared at the number longer than I probably needed to. That wasn't generosity, that wasn't love, that was a subscription, a premium one. For 10 years, that line item had been treated like gravity. Non-negotiable, unquestioned. I had built my entire financial life around the absence of that money. Smaller apartment, older car, no margin for error. I worked 60-hour weeks managing international supply chains, rerouting shipments, eliminating inefficiencies, saving companies millions. Yet somehow the biggest financial leak in my life had gone unaddressed, because it had a familiar name, family. My mother's voice echoed in my head, "Get out." In logistics, when a client refuses delivery, you don't force the shipment. You return it to origin, you liquidate inventory, you stop bleeding resources into a closed system. They wanted me gone. Fine, then my money was gone too. I tapped the transfer, details expanded, I hit edit, then cancel series, the app paused. A gray warning box appeared, polite and emotionless. "Are you sure you want to delete this recurring transaction?" My thumb hovered. Not because of doubt, but because of awareness. This was the most expensive click of my life. I pressed confirm. The line item vanished, the balance projection refreshed, jumping by nearly $4,000. Just like that, I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat and put the car in drive. The brown stone receded in the rearview mirror until the porch light disappeared into darkness. The transaction was complete. The hotel room was anonymous. Gray carpet, blackout curtains, a view of nothing in particular. I didn't unpack. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. I needed data. In my world, feelings don't guide decisions. Numbers do. My tax returns stared back at me. Senior logistics manager. Annual income, $145,000. I managed medical equipment distribution, machines that kept people alive, high stakes, tight timelines. And yet my personal accounts told a different story. Barely anything left at the end of each month. No cushion, no growth. A lifestyle that looked more like survival than success. Why? Because for the last 4 years, I had been the sole liquidity provider for a failing enterprise known as my family. The brownstone wasn't a home. It was a stage set. My parents didn't live in it. They performed in it. Dinner parties, image management, maintaining appearances for people they barely liked. My brother lived in the basement suite, which they called the garden level, like branding could change reality. He was 33, unemployed, unprofitable, protected. They called him an entrepreneur. I called him a line item with no return. I paid for his experiments, his failed startups, his hobbies disguised as ambition, crypto, e-commerce, consulting firms without CLI. Hence, each collapse was framed as almost. Each bailout was just one more round. They didn't see risk, they saw potential. And me, I was stability, predictable, renewable. People like to call that weakness. They're wrong. It's conditioning. You don't realize the system is broken when you're born inside it. The demands don't arrive all at once. They escalate. Small requests become expectations. Expectations become obligations. By the time the number hits 4 figures, saying no feels like betrayal. Love in my house had always been transactional, and tonight the transaction had finally failed. I closed the laptop and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence cost $200 a night. It was worth it. Because for the first time, no one was extracting anything from me. I didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. I didn't know that in 30 days the phone would ring, not with apologies but with panic. I didn't know that the numbers I hadn't checked would reveal something far worse than entitlement. I only knew this. They thought eviction was leverage. They didn't realize they'd just terminated the only account keeping the system alive. And when the invoice finally bounced, there would be no renegotiation. The silence didn't feel accidental. It felt strategic. I moved out of the hotel after 3 weeks. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted permanence. Something that didn't feel like I was waiting for permission to exist. The apartment was 3 miles south, a glass tower overlooking the lake. Clean lines, efficient layout, no history embedded in the walls, no expectations lingering in the corners. I signed the lease without calling anyone. That alone felt revolutionary. The first night, I sat on the floor with takeout containers and listened to the hum of the building. Elevators, distant traffic, wind pressing against glass. It was quiet but not empty. It was neutral. And neutrality, I was learning, is a luxury when you've grown up inside emotional debt. I bought furniture slowly, not antiques, not pieces with character, things that did exactly what they were designed to do. A couch that didn't need protecting, a table that didn't come with a story, a coffee maker that cost more than it needed to, and I bought it anyway. Every purchase felt like a test. Would guilt show up? It didn't. Mornings settled into a rhythm. I woke up early, made coffee, stood by the window and watched the lake change color with the sky. I waited for my phone to ring. It didn't. Day 5 passed, day 10, day 20, nothing. At first I thought maybe they were done with me. Maybe the eviction had been final. Maybe the door really had closed both ways. But that didn't match the system I knew. In their world, silence wasn't rejection. It was assumption. They assumed I would break first, that the discomfort of separation would override logic, that I would panic, apologize, restore keep payments quietly, and slip back into place without forcing them to acknowledge what had happened. They assumed the autopay was still running, because it always had. They were sitting in a warm house, confident in a pattern they'd never had to manage themselves. They had never tracked the dates, never checked the balances, never considered what happened if I stopped. They didn't know the account was already liquidated. I did, and I knew the timeline. Mortgage systems are predictable. Grace periods, courtesy notices, escalation schedules. I'd made sure of that for years, monitoring deadlines, smoothing over shortfalls before anyone else noticed. But this time, I let the clock run. Day 45 is where things change. That's when the system stops being polite. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk reviewing a shipment schedule when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in over a month. My father. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I finished my email. Then I answered. There was no greeting. "What did you do?" he shouted. His voice was thin, cracked in a way I had never heard before. Panic stripped of authority. "The bank called. They say we're delinquent. They say the mortgage bounced." I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting toward the skyline outside my office window. "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "I stopped paying for a house I was evicted from." "That was a fight," he snapped. "You know how your mother gets. Families fight, but you can't just cut off the mortgage. That money is for the estate. It's for the legacy." There it was, the word they always used when they wanted me to forget the math, legacy. "You told me to leave," I said. "I left. My money left with me." "You have a duty," he insisted, "an obligation. This isn't about feelings." I almost laughed because he was right about one thing. It wasn't about feelings. It was about a belief he'd held for decades, that my emotional compliance and my financial compliance were separate systems, that even if I was expelled, the payments would continue. Listening to him unravel, something finally snapped into focus. This wasn't favoritism. It was economics, specifically sunk cost. They had invested their identity into my brother for 33 years. To admit he was a liability now, to demand rent, accountability, or employment, would mean admitting they had misallocated everything. They couldn't face that. So they burned the only profitable asset instead. I wasn't their daughter in that moment. I was fresh capital. "I'm not your insurance policy," I said, "and I'm not paying for a house where I'm not welcome." "You're selfish," he said, cold. "No," I replied, "I'm solvent." I ended the call. That afternoon I logged into the joint account, the one I'd funded for years, the operational hub. I still had access, a leftover assumption that I would always be there to troubleshoot. The balance was barely $200. I pulled the transaction history. 10 months. That's how far back the trail went. The mortgage payments weren't late. They were gone. They had stopped paying entirely almost a year ago. While I continued transferring money every month, I followed the money, and that's when I found the fire hose. Transfers to my brother. Constant, casual, hundreds, thousands. Then one transaction stopped me cold. A down payment. 5 figures. Followed by monthly payments large enough to make a mortgage nervous. The memo line read, "Vehicle investment." My hands went still. I searched the dealership, cross-referenced the numbers, fully loaded, Luxury pickup, blacked out, $65,000, bought with the money I sent to keep a roof over their heads. They didn't fall behind because of groceries. They diverted the mortgage to buy my brother a status symbol. They gambled that I would never check. Or worse, that even if I did, I would pay again to save them from consequences. They didn't mismanage the money. They stole it. And I had the receipts. I sat back in my chair as the weight of it settled. The silence hadn't been punishment. It had been confidence. They thought I was still covering the damage. They had no idea the system had already shut down. And when the foreclosure notice came, they would finally understand what happens when the silent investor exits without warning. Once you see theft clearly, it changes the texture of memory. Moments that once felt confusing snap into alignment. Conversations replay themselves with new subtitles. The constant anxiety I carried for years, always wondering why there was never enough money despite my income, finally had a culprit. I didn't confront them right away, not because I was afraid, but because I needed certainty. In my world, accusations without documentation are noise. I needed proof that would survive daylight, scrutiny, and denial. So I did what I always do when a system fails. I audited it, I exported the statements, every deposit, every withdrawal, I categorized them. Mortgage, utilities, transfers, emergency expenses that mysteriously never touched an actual emergency. The pattern was unmistakable. The house hadn't been a priority for months. My brother had every shortfall mapped back to him, his ideas, his toys, his reputation maintenance. The mortgage wasn't forgotten, it was sacrificed. And that realization burned colder than anger. They had chosen. I assembled the evidence into a folder. Clean, chronological, highlighted, no commentary. Numbers speak better without emotion. I didn't call, I waited. Foreclosure processes don't move quickly, but they move relentlessly. Notices escalate. Courtesy gives way to consequence. And once a bank starts the machine, sentiment no longer matters. 30 days after my audit, the letter arrived. Not to my parents, to me, a courtesy copy. Former financial contact. I stared at the subject line longer than I should have. Notice of default. I didn't feel triumph. I felt finality. 3 days later, security called my desk. Ms. Evans, there are 2 people in the lobby asking for you. They say they're your parents. I told them to wait. Not out of spite, out of control. I finished my coffee, reviewed a shipping contract, signed off on a reroute request. Then I stood, picked up the folder, and took the elevator down. The lobby was all glass and stone, designed to make visitors feel exposed. My parents looked smaller than I remembered. My mother clutched a tissue like it was an anchor. My father stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped inward. When they saw me, they rose quickly, relief flooding their faces. She moved first, arms open, tears ready. I stepped back. Distance is a language. Vanessa, she sobbed, thank God you have to help us. My father nodded frantically. We're losing the house, the bank. For the sake of the family, she said, for your brother. There it was. The script never changed. I didn't raise my voice. I opened the folder. I didn't cause this, I said evenly, and I can't fix it. I handed my father the printouts. He stared, his face drained of color as he followed the highlights, the down payment, the monthly installments, the memo line in his own handwriting. My mother stopped crying. What is this? She whispered. This, I said, is where the mortgage went. Silence fell between us. You used the money I sent to protect the house to buy him a truck, I continued. You didn't lose the legacy, you traded it. My father's hands shook. We were going to replace it, he said weakly, once things stabilized. They didn't, I replied, and now it's gone. My mother reached for me again. You can still help, she said. Just cover the arrears, we'll fix everything. I stepped back toward the security gates. I don't have that money anymore, I said. He does. Her face collapsed. That was the moment it finally landed. I wasn't the backup plan. I was the plan, and now there was no one left to absorb the impact. Sell the truck, I added. That's your equity. Security opened the gate. Vanessa, wait, she cried. I didn't. The auction happened 90 days later. I didn't attend. I didn't need to watch the gavel fall to know the outcome. The house sold for enough to satisfy the bank. Nothing more. The illusion of permanence evaporated. My parents moved into a rental, smaller, cheaper, unremarkable. The truck was repossessed weeks later. Without my money, my brother couldn't sustain the performance. The entrepreneur went to work in a warehouse. Reality doesn't negotiate. I blocked their numbers, not to punish them, to protect what I was building. Peace isn't passive, it's defended. And for the first time in my life, the system finally belonged to me. The quiet after collapse is different from ordinary silence. It doesn't ask questions, it doesn't echo, it just STS, wide and unoccupied. When the house was sold and the accounts closed, there was no dramatic confrontation, no final speech, no apology that arrived late and half-formed. The system simply powered down. I expected relief to feel loud. Instead, it was subtle. Mornings became slower, evenings longer. The mental background noise, the constant vigilance, the calculations, the unspoken contingency plans, faded. I hadn't realized how much of my attention had been spent bracing for the next emergency. Without them, there were no emergencies. I stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed. I stopped flinching at unknown numbers. The absence of chaos felt unfamiliar enough to be uncomfortable at first, like living in a house where the smoke alarm has finally stopped chirping, and you keep waiting for the next warning. It never came. My parents tried once more. An email from an unfamiliar address slipped past my filters. It was long, disorganized, full of grief framed as confusion. My mother wrote about family bonds and forgiveness. My father wrote about stress and miscommunication. Neither wrote the words, "I'm sorry." Neither acknowledged the theft. They spoke as if the collapse had been caused by bad timing, not bad choices. I read it once, then I archived it. No response. Closure doesn't require consensus. My brother didn't reach out. Not to apologize. Not to explain. I imagine the loss of the truck hurt more than the loss of the house. Status had always mattered more to him than shelter. Without the vehicle, without the illusion, the persona collapsed. He took the warehouse job because he had no one left to shield him from consequence. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt neutrality. In systems theory, neutrality means the process is working as intended. The hardest part wasn't walking away, it was recalibrating my identity. For decades, my value had been externally defined. Provider, stabilizer, fixer. The person who absorbed impact so others didn't have to. Without that role, there was a vacuum. Who was I if no one needed me to save them? The answer didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, ordinary moments, choosing paint colors without justification, buying groceries without calculating how much would be left after transfers, saying no without rehearsing an explanation. Each moment rewired something. I started sleeping better. I stopped grinding my teeth. My performance at work improved, not because I worked harder, but because my mind was no longer split between crises that weren't mine. People talk about no contact like it's cruelty, like it's an overreaction. But distance isn't punishment, it's containment. You don't leave a burning building to teach it a lesson. You leave because staying would destroy you. Family is not an asset by default, it's a system, and systems that consume without replenishing eventually collapse. I didn't destroy mine. I exited before it destroyed me. One evening, I sat, my balcony watching the city lights blink on. My coffee cup was warm in my hands. The air was calm. I thought about the word peace. People treat it like a feeling. It's not, it's a balance sheet. On one side, loss. On the other, autonomy. I lost the illusion of unconditional love. I gained ownership of my future. That trade was final and fair. The guilt didn't disappear. That was the lie people told me, that once you walk away, the weight lifts instantly and everything becomes light. It doesn't. Guilt lingers because it was designed to. It's not an emotion that arises naturally in these systems. It's installed early, reinforced often, and triggered automatically whenever you choose yourself over the role you were assigned. For weeks after the foreclosure, it crept in during quiet moments, while brushing my teeth, while standing in line for coffee, while lying awake just before sleep, a voice that asked, "Was it really that bad?" A voice that suggested, "You could have helped a little." I learned to recognize that voice. It didn't sound like mine, it sounded like training. I started tracking my finances the way I tracked everything else, with precision, not out of fear this time, but curiosity. Without the monthly transfers, my account stabilized immediately. Savings grew. Investment contributions that had once been theoretical became automatic. My emergency fund, something I'd never truly had, hit 6 months, then 9. The numbers told a story I'd never been allowed to see. I wasn't irresponsible. I wasn't bad with money. I had been subsidizing failure. Once that stopped, my life expanded naturally, without force, without sacrifice. That realization rewrote years of self-blame. Friends noticed the change before I did. "You seem lighter," one said over dinner. "You laugh more," another observed. I hadn't been aware that I'd stopped laughing. The hypervigilance was gone, the reflexive scanning for threats, the sense that any moment of calm was temporary. Peace didn't arrive like a celebration. It arrived like a stable climate. There were moments of doubt, birthdays, holidays, family-centered commercials that suggested love was synonymous with endurance. I skipped gatherings, declined invitations, built my own rituals. I learned that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness drains you, solitude restores you. I thought about my parents less and less, not because I'd forgiven them, but because my nervous system no longer revolved around them. Forgiveness is optional. Freedom is not. One afternoon, while reviewing a long-term financial projection, I noticed something that made me stop. The future version of me, 10 years out, looked different, not just financially. Calmer, more stable, untethered. For the first time, my plans didn't include contingencies for someone else's collapse. There was no hidden column labeled "What if they need me?" That column was gone. And nothing broke. People talk about sacrifice as if it's always noble. Sometimes it's just misallocated loyalty. I didn't abandon my family. I stopped funding a system that required my depletion to function. And systems that require sacrifice without consent are not families. They are liabilities. The guilt faded slowly, not because I argued with it, but because my life proved it wrong. Every peaceful morning, every uninterrupted night. Oh, be consumed. You are not cruel for ending a contract that only benefits one side. You are not broken for wanting a life that isn't constantly on fire. The guilt you feel is not evidence of wrongdoing. It is proof that the system was designed to keep you compliant. I sit now in a space that belongs entirely to me. The coffee is hot. The silence is uninterrupted. The future is unencumbered. When I look at the ledger of my life, the numbers finally balance. Loss on one side, freedom on the other. Peace wasn't cheap, but it was worth every single penny.